I just want to start just by thanking Quante Holden, the English department's resident tech guru. Quante, as you know, none of this happens without you. He's the reason why we're able to have this conversation via Zoom with the students of 321S, as well as stream it online on the English department's Facebook page. I also just want to thank the College of Liberal Arts and Dean Smith for their support in the form of Paletz innovative course enhancement. So I just want to start with a bit of background about the class, and I know I've spoken a little bit to both of you about kind of the concerns of the syllabus and what we got up to in class. But the title of the class was Knives Out, and it was sort of the idea was to explore the craft of fiction through the window of the mystery genre. So like in our first week, we talked about resonances between Murders of the Rue Morgue by Edgar Allan Poe and the Theseus myth. And then over the next few weeks, we followed that Ariadne's thread through Ibn Hakan al-Bakari, Murdered in His Labyrinth, which is the closed-door murder mystery that Jorge Luis Borges wrote in response to Poe's Rue Morgue. From there, we went through Mosley's Devil in a Blue Dress, through Matt Johnson's illustrated Whodunit Incognito, and finally through Mark Hayden's The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. So as we explored the genre and like sometimes unpleasantly familiar conventions and tropes of the genre, we were reading with an eye to all the building blocks of fiction. Good characters, good dialogue, good setting, good solid point of view, voice. And I think, as we read, like we discovered something kind of unexpected, which is that, the constrictions of genre are also a site of inspiration, of an inspiration. So more than once, I think we circled around a kind of uncomfortable truth for people who are making writing or maybe making art, period, which is that as authors and as artists, we never really work in isolation. We're not soulless so much as we are members of a choir. We're not giving sermons, that is, but we're speaking phrases in an ongoing conversation. So as writers of short stories, my students spoke phrases of their own. And with the same sense of writing that animated Borges's responses to Poe and that animated Poe's response to the Theseus myth, every student in English 321S, Knives Out, identified a writer that they wanted to respond to. And they crafted a really amazing and cool and wildly unexpected reading list that's transcended genre, that transcended era. We read Kristen Rupenian, we read Richard Connell, we read Jakiria Diaz, we read Sally Rooney, we read Judith Hamilton's versions of Greek myths of Phaeton. So the result in our fiction workshop was a frankly brilliant mix of stories, reworkings by my students in response to stories like Section 8, Cat Person, the Phaeton myth, and the heist novel. So as we read the fiction of authors we admired, I think we rediscovered this uncomfortable truth about our art. Like every writer's voice is her own, and every character, every setting is singular and unique. But plots really have a way of echoing and coming back. At the end of the day, give us conflict, give us connection, make us care, raise the stakes. And the traditions in which we're working are not just counterpoints, but they're also guides. And in other words, that people turn pages in the year 2021 for the same reasons that they turn pages in 1821 or 1921. If Emily Inglethorpe dies in the first chapter by strychnine, we're not going to stop reading until Hercule Poirot, by way of Agatha Christie, tells us who did it and how and why. And I guess for me, it's really fitting that we're going to end the semester, because this is It was our last day together with two authors, Amin Ahmad and Brian Panowich, who are writing about singular settings, whether it's Martha's Vineyard or Barbados, the rugged upland in North Georgia, and singular characters, moonshining troubadours, or disgraced ex-army captains or failed novelists or whoever, and doing so in singular voices. But as they explore character and place, Brian and Amin utilize the armature of genre as a counterpoint and as a guide. Brian's first novel won the Southern Book Prize for Best Mystery, and his second novel garnered him the Georgia Author Year of the Award for Best Mystery. But I think those accolades kind of obscure the fact that all three and counting of Brian's novels are really about family. They circle around the same family in the rocky corner of North Georgia they call home. The Bull Mountain series it's a multi-generational Cain and Abel daisy chain, a recursive meditation on fratricidal longing that I think has less in common with Conan Doyle's Holmes series than it does with the Barocco Infinities of Borges or Umberto Eco. Amin Ahmad's Last Taxi Ride was named by NPR as one of the best books in 2015, but it also happens to be a whodunit. Kirkus Reviews was right to call his first novel a fast-paced literary thriller, but The Caretaker is also a meditation on class, on family, on honor, and on the dubious promise of belonging. In his short story, The Palmview Hotel, a grieving novelist goes to the hotel where his brother was last seen alive. A lead from a cleaning lady leads the novelist to the hotel security man, who leads him to the officer in charge of the investigation, who points him finally to the murderer we met in the first act. In other words, it turns out it was suicide all along. The Palmview Hotel reverses, I think, the poles that this class is interested in reversing. It's a piece of literary fiction. It's a well-told story about grief and loss, but its plot looks not a little bit like the plot of a mystery novel. So without further ado, and without me running my mouth too much more, please join me in welcoming Amin Ahmad and Brian Panowich. It's awesome to have you guys. Thanks so much for being here. I wonder if you guys will just kick us off with just talking to us a little bit about the path you took to writing. Who or what made you want to write? Who or what made you want to tell stories?
Amin?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. Path to writing. I've always been writing ever since I was like a little tiny kid, right? And I come from a family of bullshit artists and fabricators. Nobody in my family has ever had like a normal day. You come home and you're like, oh my God, you will not believe this thing that happened. And I grew up in India, so there was a lot of wacky stuff happening. Monkeys would crawl into our house from outside and sit on my aunt's dressing table and use her makeup. So I just grew up around storytellers, but I didn't grow up around writers. I didn't know what a writer was. In fact, when I came to the States in 1985, there were no Indian Americans writing in fiction. I mean, I grew up reading stuff that was exclusively about white people. So I've had a career as an architect. No, first I have a degree in economics. I worked for Citibank in Dubai for a while because my dad's a banker. I had a 13-year career in architecture, but in Boston in the early 2000s, I started taking evening adult classes in creative writing. And then at a certain point, I got very sick, and my wife and I moved to New York City for her to do a postdoc at Columbia University. And she said, hey, you've been wanting to write for a long time. We've got a year off, we'll be broke, but let's give it a shot. So I ended up taking some classes at the New School in suspense writing. And I was always the guy in my writing group who wrote beautiful prose about India and houses and, bygone times, and nothing happened. I was that guy, like nothing happened. And so I deliberately signed up for a suspense writing course, and my teacher is a published suspense author, and she said, hey, this seems pretty good, keep going. So with her encouragement, I finished writing a book, and then I ended up getting a book deal, and then another book deal. But the path to writing was very long, very complicated. And I think only now can I call myself like a writer with a, without feeling like I'm an imposter. So thank you. That's it.
And you had me at monkeys on the dresser, man. I would have known I was like charmed from right there. There's monkeys on the dresser. Life's gonna be grand.
Yep.
I call myself the accidental novelist because I have never once, until it started, set out to do this. I can tell you that my main inspiration for writing would be Stan Lee and Frank Miller for the most part. I grew up on comic books. My father was a massive comic book fan. I learned how to reading comics and not graphic novels. Now I know it's cool to say it that way, but they're comic books, and I embraced my inner nerd. And that's what I wanted to do. Like growing up, I can't remember a time when I was little where I wasn't eating tomato soup and grilled cheese and had a stack of comic books next to me saying I can do this better than them. Also, I've been very arrogant, and I thought I would always do that. That was my course in life, and that stayed that way all through high school, all up until I started college, Georgia Southern. And then something really crazy happened. I was convinced that comic books was what I wanted to do with my life. And then I found out that girls were not really into that, man. Like comic books was not, a comic book geek like me was not gonna work well. So I spent a lot of time alone. So I picked up a guitar. My dad, you mentioned you came from a family of bullshit artists. I come from a family of jack of all trades, master of none. We're so really, really okay at a lot of things, And so I'd always been a guitar player too. So I decided to do that. And so I put a band together right out of college, and I went on the road for 15 years. And that's how I supported myself. And I was a traveling musician, writing all my own songs. So the writing went from comic books to writing songs. And then in 2009, I met my wife, and we had a baby girl, and that whole career as a musician on the road came to a screeching halt. It was done. So I packed up everything and moved back to Georgia, and got a job as a firefighter. So that was out of the blue. I just didn't have a skill set. I'd graduated college with a psychology degree, which was pretty much useless. I could maybe be a substitute teacher if I wanted to, or I could go to work for the fire department and work for 24 hours and be offered for 48. So it felt like a weekend every time you got off work. And I thought that was great. Well, about a year into doing that, and I loved it, by the way, I loved that job. But about a year after doing that, I realized that there was something missing. I had this huge hole in me that I did not know how to fill. And I came to the realization it was because I was creating something my whole life, from the time I was a child reading comics and writing comics and pursuing that career, all the way up until I started pursuing music and doing that. I was creating something, stories and characters and songs, and all of that stopped. And I found myself as just this guy working for the, county. And I wasn't okay with it. And so I started writing. I'd always been reading, and I've always been an avid reader, and I would devour 2 or 3 books a week at the firehouse. And I always say to myself, I can do this better than they can. And I'm one of those guys, when I start a book, I have to finish it. So, and I'm done with a book, and I would always put it down, and I'd either say, man, that was fucking fantastic, or I'd be like, I could have done that better. So I started reading what's called flash fiction. And JP, I'm sure that your class is familiar with what that is. Just short, bite-sized, 800-word stories. If you can pull off a story that's going to yank you into it, it's going to take your reader and make them connect to your character in 800 words, man, yeah, that's an accomplishment. And it's much, much harder than you would imagine. And So I started reading these online at these flash fiction websites like Shotgun Honey and Flash Fiction Offensive, and I just was addicted to them. And so I thought I would try it, and I started sending in stories, sending them in, and eventually one of them, the guy called, he emailed me back and said, we're going to publish this. Now that meant nothing. Yeah, I didn't know money, it's just 1 week, you're on the website, people can read it, few people will comment on it. But man, it was amazing. That, I want to say, that was when I found out what it felt like to actually be a part of a community of people that shared the same kind of passion that I did for storytelling. So I did that, and I remember we went and got ice cream, got milkshakes, and we were like, woo, this is it, And so I spent like the next year or two doing that, just writing stories, and I was content. That was me right there, man. I want to write these short stories, and if I got one published every now and then, we'd go get ice cream, and that was it. That was the end of that. One of my stories was nominated for an award, and I've come to find out years later that award was just some guy's website in his basement. He just picked my story, so it wasn't really a huge deal, but it was pretty much bragging rights in that community, and it got nominated for this, like I said, this award, the Spine Tingler Award. And I lost, by the way. I did not win that award. Ken Bruin did. And if you're going to lose, I guess you should lose to a guy like Ken Bruin. But a agent in New York read it and liked it and reached out and emailed me. And I was like, man, this is like the Prince of Nigeria getting in touch with me, man. Who is this guy? Nobody could honestly. He's like, if you ever write a book, give me a call. I looked him up, and he was a big deal, man. He was Tom Franklin's agent. He was James Ellroy's agent. I had this Wiley Cash, and I was like, wow, this guy's a big deal. So I went back to the firehouse and wrote a book. Took me a year. Every third day in the firehouse, and I wrote a book about a story, like based on that 800-word story that he had read. I expanded that into a novel, and I sent it to him, and thinking nothing of it, like, okay, well, if this works, great. If it don't, it don't. And 6 months later, he sold it to the biggest publisher in the world. And 6 months after that, I was the biggest selling novel in Italy. I was watching operas performed based on my book. I was all over the place. I was nominated for every award there was to be nominated for, and boom, I was a novelist. And holy shit, if I didn't even see it coming. So I know that's a long story, and I apologize for eating up so much time, but I have never had any formal training at all. I've never taken a class. I did take a few classes in college about journalism, but it wasn't very informative. Every single piece of writing that I've ever done has been just based on, wow, what a cool idea this would be. And it is campfire storytelling. I come from a long lineup, and so now I get paid to do it, and I'm grateful for it every single day. So,
well, I think what I'm struck by is that you both you both have these backgrounds they're creative backgrounds, but they're creative in, I think, two very different ways. But Brian, you've got music, and you didn't mention it. I hope it's okay that I'm mentioning that. Your dad was Waylon Jennings,
bass player. Yeah.
Right? So it's the music is kind of in your DNA, and Amin, your background in architecture, and I mean, these are kind of these are forms of creation, and it strikes me. I mean, I am not trained as an architect, but I was a construction grunt, and there is something about novel writing that feels a little like framing house. You need a solid foundation in the world you happen to be writing about. A tremendous amount goes into the planning of it. I sort of think of chapters like the stanzas in a poem, which in Italian that means a room. And so I guess I have the same question for both of you, but in slightly different terms. I mean, are you aware of your background in architecture ever influencing how you write, your practice, and ditto to you, Brian. If you're aware of a shaping influence of music and how that plays a role in your work. Amin, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for that question. Yes, absolutely. Like, I don't think I could have been a writer if I hadn't been an architect before. Because for 15 years, I was working on very complex creative projects with a lot of moving pieces. And you might not know how architects design stuff. I mean, students here might be interested, but basically the idea is to go from something that's a design that's very loose. So the first sketch you do is kind of an exploration sketch. And you come up with many different options of whatever it is that you're trying to get at, right? And you really explore the problem. You're not trying to solve it. And then you move into what's called, so that's called schematic design. And then you move into what's called design development, where you take some of these ideas and you try and make it real, right? You start putting the program in, you put in the plumbing, you put in the electrical, and then often your design will collapse because it will not work. And you'll be back to the drawing board and you have to come up with other concepts to deal with this. And then only once you have something solved in design development, you go on and like draw blueprints of it. So it's a very systematic design process that has a lot of flexibility in it, and it's iterative. So with each iteration, your building gets more and more real. And without kind of realizing it, when I started writing novels, I started kind of following like an architecture design process. So to this day, I allow myself to like write freely for like 100 pages, 150 pages. And only once I have something do I go back and I outline it all the way through. And I start rewriting it. I use index cards to create scenes. So I'm trying to create a writing process for a novel that's both flexible, but there's a system, and I always know where I am in the process. So many writers will start writing a novel and get hung up on the first 10 pages, right? They got to get this right. They got to get this right. And I now know, like, when you reach, Brian, I'm sure you know this as well, like when you reach the end of a novel, you know so much about it, you're inevitably going to have to go back through the novel and to the beginning and set stuff up, you know, especially if you're writing something highly plotted, you're writing a thriller or a mystery. So that was something that really carried over from my architecture design process. And the other thing is, like, writers complain a lot about how hard writing is. And they're like, oh man, it's so hard. Like, I'm dying here. I'm like, really? Try to be out at like 6 a.m. on a construction site where you're arguing with some like 6'3" Italian dude, you know, about a concrete pour, right? Like, that's gone wrong. Like what I'm doing is a dream. It's so easy as compared to what I was doing before. So like Brian, if I'm inside, I'm not wearing insulated pants and like 6 layers of clothing. You know, it's like life is pretty good. So that's my take. I'm curious to hear, Brian, about your take on music.
It's fascinating, and I find it fascinating anyway, how I'm about to say everything you just did in a different way as it applies to me. Music informed, or writing music and being involved in music for so long informed everything I do. I would not be the writer that I am had I not spent 15 years out there trying to do that, because writing and music it's a shift in pitch. I mean, first of all, it's writing, period. But a novel has the same pieces and parts that a song does. You have to have that big grabbing hook. You have to have crescendos. There has to be conflict. There has to be something going on that's going to make somebody listen to it. And it's the exact thing. Like, your first couple of seconds of a song, you've got to have that first chapter. You know, the first chapter is going to sell the book. You know, the last chapter is going to sell the next one. It's the same thing with music. And like you said, where you have this design process that you go through, like when I would sit down and write a song, it always starts off with a vision, an idea, a line. Maybe you hear a turn of phrase somewhere. Oh, that would make a good song. Or you see somebody or what they're going through in that particular instance, that would make a great song. So you have this little spark, and then you go from there. You just start strumming, and eventually you put this melody on top of it. Now, okay, maybe that's going to work, maybe it's not, but you have to get through. Once you have the song written, you're going to realize, okay, well, it could be better here, here, and here. Same thing with a novel, man. I burned through my first draft in 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, and then I don't never look back at it. and then it sits for a minute, like a hot minute. And then I will go back after I've marinated on it and I've run around the block 15 to 16 times. I'll go back and say, okay, let's start this revision process, just like you would a song. You go into the studio to record something and you realize, oh, that sucks. That shouldn't be there. That totally distracts from the rest of the song. The same thing with crafting a story. You realize that this thing right here that you wrote, that you were loving when you did it, now is a stumbling block in your story, you know, and so it's got to go. And that's, yeah, it's absolutely 100%. I would be interested to find out anyone's take, you know, regardless of what they did in the past and how they would apply that to writing it. Whether you're a plumber, I bet you could do the same mimicking process that we just discussed, and you said it and I said it, and it's exactly the same way it works. I wonder how anybody's background would fit into that. That would be interesting to find out.
Well, you know, you guys are both talk about structure, and I admire so much the structures in your novel. You know, these are solid plots, but I'm also struck by the fact that you're both interested in characters, and you're interested in the way individuals navigate systems that are bigger than them, whether that's, you know, Department of Immigration, Homeland Security, or the DEA. And I, you know, it strikes me about both your work, and I, you know, you've got these solidly grounded and fleshed out characters, and yet you managed to give me, as a reader, these wild, out of left field, and yet totally organic twists in the plot. And I guess my question is, like, you know, how do you balance writing real deep, complex, surprising characters with what a plot needs to be?
Plot for me, and I'm sorry, I mean, if you don't mind, plot for me is always secondary. In fact, the best book, in my opinion, that I've ever written is my second one, Like Lions. There is no plot. If you think about it, I mean, there's no mystery going on. There's not, I mean, sure, there's some thrilling things happening, but I mean, for the most part, it's just family drama. And because I love these characters, I love them so much, and I get inside them, and I know that this is something that I have to write. And so if the plot shows up, great. Now, luckily, for 3 novels now, I've been able to pull that off, where the plot just, and you said it, organically, it just happens. As I start to create, like, it'll start with an idea, or like I said, start with some small spark, and then I'll just follow these characters down their own rabbit hole, man. And if I'm lucky, those characters start telling me what's going to happen next. And then I know that I'm cooking with gas, man, that I'm on to something. I know I'm going to be walking into walls for the next month or so, because I'm going to have their voices in my head. And I know that sounds like mental illness, but I think that that's hand in hand with what we do. So, and yeah, so plot for me is always secondary, man. If you spend all your time trying to figure out the big twist, you're just going to fuck yourself, because that's what you're going to be constantly thinking about. Oh, I have to make sure that this is surprising. Well, guess what? It's not going to be if it comes off mechanical like that. Get into your characters, man, and let them dictate to you how it's going to play out. And I promise you, surprise yourself. It's true.
I mean,
yeah, nice, Brian. I agree with all that. I think that JP, you said organic, which is an interesting way of saying it, because some plots, especially big budget blockbusters, when we watch them, we know, you know, you could watching some big action sequence of something being blown up, and you know they're doing it because they had to have like a certain number of these, and it's not coming out of the characters, and it kind of makes you kind of like you become numb after a while. So I think you're right, Brian, that like when plot is working, it feels organic, and it comes out of the characters. It comes out of the contradictions within the characters, right? So sure. I think when people are exploring character, they're like, oh yeah, he went to high school here, and he went to college here, and he was in the Marines, and his favorite thing is bologna sandwiches. You know, like who cares? Like what we really want to know is, what are the contradictions within the person? You know, you could have like the sentimental killer, you know, you could have, you know, the honorable the honorable bad boy. You could have the bad mother. Now you got something. You have a contradiction, and you can build a plot out of that. So for me, the way into plot is always through place. I'm as an architect, I was drawn to architecture because I'm interested in places, and I'm interested in situations. So for my first book, I was very intrigued by the island of Martha's Vineyard, which is the quintessential upper crust New England resort, but it's in the summer, it's staffed exclusively by foreigners, right? Everybody there is from Jamaica, from Poland, from the Czech Republic. So I got very interested in this contradiction, and so I set my first thriller in Martha's Vineyard with like an immigrant Indian ex-Indian Army captain who happens to be working on the vineyard because he needs a job and he's undocumented. And my second plot came out of the world of New York City cab drivers, which every time I get in a cab, and unfortunately the era of the cabs is almost over with like Uber and stuff, but it was exclusively Indian. So I would get into a cab and I could speak Hindi, I can speak Bengali, and I start talking to these guys, and and they had really interesting lives. They went everywhere, they saw everything, they experienced the city in a certain way. So I was kind of interested in New York City cab drivers. I think that to create a good plot, you have to have some good ingredients. People think that they have to come up with a brilliantly original idea to power their book. It's not about ideas. You could take the most mundane 2 or 3 things and put them together, right? Like I have in my second book, The Last Taxi Ride, I have cab drivers, I have immigration, I have a Bollywood movie star, and I have twins. All of those things have been done before, but I kind of mushed them together and created kind of like this rich stew. So I don't think we, writers sit and think about like, oh, should I do character today or should I do plot, right? You always start with people, you start with dialogues, you start with ideas, you start with a vision, but then how do you build a big complex novel out of that? How do you survive that, right? That might be a discussion that's interesting to have. For me, people say there's 2 kinds of novelists. They're outliners and people who write by the seat of their pants. They're called pantsers. And I tried writing a bunch of novels just by the seat of my pants, right? And they were big messes and I couldn't fix them. I really could not fix them. And nobody ever talked about plot. I took writing classes all the time and people wouldn't talk about plot. They said it was almost like a dirty word, right? And so I actually got really interested in screenwriting at a certain point. And if you move into the screenwriting world, the screenwriters are blatant about plot. They're like, here's a 3-act structure. It can be a 5-act structure. It could be an 8-act structure. Here's how it works. And all these incredibly complex shows that draw us in for weeks at a time on Netflix and Hulu and stuff, they all follow kind of screenwriting plot structure. I mean, think about Breaking Bad or The Sopranos, like how many seasons, how many episodes, right? And it all hangs together because they have some idea of plot and manipulating events. So I learned a lot from I love movies, and I especially love movies from the early 70s, which were really realistic but well plotted, like Taxi Driver, Dog Day Afternoon, like all these kind of really cool movies. And so I learned. I one entire shelf in my study is just screenwriting books. I think you have to absorb all that stuff. And of course, Brian, I think the other thing is you are what you eat. So if you're writing suspense novels and you've never read one, like good luck to you, right? Like if you've read, like I grew up in India, we grew up. There was no literature. We got like these really shitty paperbacks that were sold on the street with like Robert Ludlum and Sidney Sheldon, and also like people like Ross MacDonald and hard-boiled noir fiction. That's what I grew up reading, right? So it's kind of like in my bones, right? So you kind of, the more of this stuff that you read and the more of it you imbibe, you kind of understand what the conventions are, and then you can start using them in new and surprising ways. But you gotta know how the stuff works. I mean, screenplay writers talk about story math. Like, what's the math of a dystopian story? Like, what are they talking about? Like what happens? How do you write a dystopian screenplay? Like, what's the math, right? Let's go out and watch 20 dystopian movies, right? And see how it works. Figure out the math, right? So you understand how it works, and then you can go ahead and change it, right? And I've come to all this stuff through a hard way. Like I wrote these two mysteries and I wrote them wrong. First of all, they have parallel timelines going on in a mystery. Wrong. Because every time you leave one timeline, you got to leave on a cliffhanger, go back to another story, leave that on a cliffhanger. Wrong. Like and I have the same character but in different locations. You have to build a world all over again. Wrong. So I did everything wrong, and I kind of but I learned a lot from doing that. And I'm approaching my latest project slightly differently. Again, a long answer, so thanks for your patience.
Hey, JP, let me just tag this on there too. But I love to bring this up whenever anybody asks about plot versus character. Are you character writer or are you plot writer? I think the most brilliant example of how to do both is Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men. And because he gives you everything. The book, there is no plot to that story. There is no plot until you get to the end and you realize, yeah, that was so significantly plotted out. But you don't see it coming. You don't see the plot happening. You see these connections between these characters, and you care so deeply about everyone involved, whether it's because you like them or you hate them or you're in pain because of them. All of these characters matter so much that the plot fades into the background. And then, boom, you have this magic thing that happens at the end where you're like, he gave me everything I needed to know, but I didn't put it together. And that's why I missed the plot until I got there and I realized that this was probably the most skilled piece of work I've ever read. And it'll take you like an afternoon. So feel free to use that one, man.
Will do. Yeah, I mean, I think without knowing it, sometimes I'm avoiding talking about plot in the classroom a little bit. And I think what an anxiety that I'm maybe just articulating now is like, I'm afraid people are going to borrow pieces from TV and movies, and there won't be character at the bottom of it. I like what you said, Brian, about thinking about a story in terms of connection. I mean, connection and disconnection in the way people relate to each other. I mean, two migrant workers who, find their way into this community, and then it goes badly wrong. That's all you need. I mean, it's not
right. Exactly. But you get so invested in the characterization, and these characters, these people become so real to you, and you are so invested in their lives that what they do, how they react, and how they connect with each other, and the things that happen to them matter. They matter deeply. And so you're not even seeing the plot happen. Those are some of the most, when we talked about The Postman Always Rings Twice, when we had that conversation way back in, I went back and read that just because you had mentioned it, and it had been ages. And I noticed there was so many things missing, like plot and like dialogue tags, like all of the things that we're taught to do weren't there. It's almost like he probably could have had a novel the size of mine, but he cut out all that shit and just left it. It's just dialogue, and it's just these basically three people, maybe four in the end, that matter. But you're so invested in those characters, man, that you're not even paying attention to the sleight of hand that he is pulling in the end, which makes that book matter.
Yeah,
it's very cool. It's very, very cool.
If I could add on to what Brian was saying for a minute. I think when we talk about plot, we're doing disservice because we are viewing it in a certain way as something that's artifice, something that's like cheating, something that like genre authors do, that like quality authors don't use plot, right? But actually, plot is just pattern. As humans, I think we're the only animal that does pattern recognition. We recognize patterns, right? So if I start a story with a guy on the phone who's bleeding, but he gets a phone call and somebody says, "How are you?" He says, "Great, I'm having a fantastic day," and his arm's all cut and he's bleeding. Instantly, the reader goes, "Hey, like, this is not adding up. I'm interested." Okay. Now that's the beginning of plot. And then you can follow patterns, and they can be very, very mild patterns. It could be like a guy wants a cup of tea, and that can power a story, right? Like, or he could be like drinking different cups of tea. Like in one of my books, I have one of the subplots or the motifs is my my character, who's a cab driver, keeps trying to find the perfect cup of tea in New York City, right? And that becomes like a little motif that goes throughout, and it helps to structure the story because it shows time passing and shows different neighborhoods and whatnot. So if we think in terms of patterns, and the moment that we see that things are not adding up in a pattern, we're interested, right? And then you're in the land of plot, in my mind. So I think that maybe instead of talking about like plot versus character, if you just start talking about like patterns, because a story is an organic object, as you said, or a novel is an organic object, and organic objects, everything is connected, right? So if you introduce something at the beginning of the book, and you never mention it throughout the rest of the book, you're doing yourself a disservice. But if you take the guy's beloved battered jean jacket, right, and it's lost in the middle of the book, and then it's found again, and then somebody makes a hole in it, and at the end he's wearing it when he rides off into the sunset. I'm making this shit up. That is, you're creating a kind of pattern or a motif that works its way through and helps the story. Does that make sense?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Just to clarify though, I mean, plot. There's no like I don't feel like literary writers, genre writers. That's all bullshit, man. We're all in the same crew. That's what we do. And anybody who feels like they need to put those walls up, I just don't have time for it. But there are some fantastic genre writers that can smoke any literary writer out there, man. France doesn't hold a candle to John Connolly, period. But it's all taste and whatnot. But I don't think that you should say plot versus character. And if I did earlier, I really meant that they work hand in hand. And I feel like if you're doing one really, really well, the other will, it will work. For me, it's always easier to get inside the characters. If you have a fantastic idea for a plot, great. Find your people and then get into those people and then have those people work that plot for you, because if you're trying to force feed an idea or a plot device, it's just going to come out exactly like that. It's going to be a plot device. But if you get the people that you're writing about to actually sell it for you, then you've got like I said, man, you're cooking with gas. I mean, both of them work hand in hand. I do feel like there are a lot of books out there that disregard plot altogether, and then it's a hot mess. I mean, McCarthy does it. What Suttree is just, man, what is going on there?
Even the God, it's it kind of wanders a little bit.
Yeah, oh my God. I mean, he's brilliant, but I mean, come on, No Country for Old Men, solid fucking plot, solid characters, breathtaking book. Suttree, gorgeous prose. What the hell is happening? But you have to love it because he's so finesse and gorgeous with his writing that, it's just one of them things. So just to clarify, like I said, man, I don't feel like you have to be a character-driven writer in order for a plot to work. I just feel like if you're doing one, if you're committed really well to these people that you're writing about, that the rest of it is just it's just gonna happen for you.
Yeah, I would agree with Brian that when a good plot is working, you don't notice it. You just carry it along with it, and you're kind of experiencing it through the way the characters are experiencing it as like life happening, not something artificial. So.
I wonder, just before we hear from students who may have questions about, next steps or your process in more particular, I wonder if y'all wouldn't mind reading just a brief excerpt out of something you're working on, or it's always fun to kind of hear in the voice of the author whatever I've just read. So feel free to read from the pieces going out to 321S. But I wonder, Amin, if you've got something, do you want to maybe kick us off, and then we'll take questions from our audience. Okay,
Brian, you want to go first?
Oh, you.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I'm right now revising a novel that I've been working on for a few years called The Night Baby. And The Night Baby is about an Indian surrogate mother who carries a baby for an American couple, becomes very attached to the baby, and then comes to America to steal the baby back. So it has an armature of suspense, but it's about children and families and like who really owns a child. That's what the book is about. the tagline for the book. Okay, so this is the opening of it. Chapter 1, Prima, the character's name is Prima, 6 kilometers outside Anand Township in India. During the day, when the pale-skinned foreigners arrive in private cars and taxis, anxiously clutching their medical folders, the Roshni Fertility Clinic resounds with the cheerful voices of doctors and nurses, the clank of medical instruments, and the whoosh of blood pressure cuffs. But late at night, the insemination rooms are empty, the banks of incubators give out a low, melancholy hum, and the building feels abandoned like a theater after all the characters have left. It is on such a night that Prema Bhave decides to run away. Picture her. She lies in a dark dormitory on the 3rd floor, surrounded by 18 other surrogates. She's 20 years old, petite, baby-faced, the youngest surrogate in the clinic, but she isn't naive. She's an orphan raised in a Mumbai slum, and she's tough. She knows exactly how the world works, or so she thinks. Prema lies on her side, eyes wide open, staring into the darkness, her hands resting on a ponderous, swollen belly. She's thinking about the contract that she signed 9 months ago with the Roshni Fertility Clinic, pages dense with clauses and subclauses she did not read, and which the doctors assured her she did not need to read, because what the contract amounted to was this: she was to rent out her womb and carry a baby made from another woman's egg and another man's sperm. The baby, they emphasized, was not hers. It had nothing to do with her. It was simply a visitor. She was a good girl. Surely she understood this. Liars, all of them. The doctors, the nurses, the psychologists who explained the process to her. When had she realized this? Probably at a 20-week ultrasound, lying on her back, sticky jelly drying on her belly. Until then, her baby had been an abstraction, but on that day, she gazed at the blurred black and white image on the screen and saw a child with tightly closed eyes, fat cheeks, pudgy hands balled into fists. Prema made further discoveries. When she hummed a lullaby, the child calmed inside her. When she delayed eating, the child kicked her angrily in the ribs. She and the child were one, a deep, intimate bond. The other surrogate said, "Hey kid, it's just your hormones." They mocked. Prema said, "You think this is your baby? You're getting strange ideas from all those silly romance novels." They continued to call their babies Munna, little one, or Bacha, child, not Prema. She secretly named her baby Lakshmi after the goddess of wealth. Now, lying in bed in the darkened dormitory, Prema imagines Lakshmi as a curly-haired newborn, as a toddler, as a young girl, laughing and growing, but it all happens in a landscape of green lawns and white houses with a clear blue sky that Prema has only seen on television. She is not in any of these images. She has been replaced by a tall Indian-American woman whom Lakshmi calls Ma or Mummy, or whatever word they use in America, a woman who has not done any of the work of the pregnancy, who has not made the baby out of her own flesh and blood, as Prema has done, as Prema is still doing. She has another 2 weeks to go until she delivers, maybe less, maybe 10 days. And as soon as she gives birth, the clinic will take her baby away, and the thought of being childless and alone fills her with terror. A newborn in the nursery next door lets out a sudden sharp cry, and the sound penetrates the nightmare that Prema is living, and she cannot take it anymore. She cannot. She slips out of bed, sheds her hospital nightgown, and pulls a faded blue camise over her head, yanking it down over her low, round belly. The baggy salwar pants luckily have a drawstring and just about fit. Kneeling, she pulls out a cloth bag from under her bed and throws in some onesies for the baby, a large bottle of neonatal vitamins, and a change of clothes. Her beloved Harlequin paperback romances she will leave behind with their creased, lurid covers. Tempted, the shy bride, a savage betrayal. She is a mother now. She has no use for this nonsense. From under a pillow, she retrieves a cell phone, 2 hairpins, and a pair of nail scissors. The cell phone is cheap, disposable, bought a few months ago to communicate with Raju, the young taxi driver who has driven her back and forth from the train station. Raju is in love with her, and whenever she craves salty dhoklas or sweet laddus, she texts his number, and he shows up at the front gate with a smile and a large box of treats. Now, Prema quickly texts him, "I need you. Go to the place we discussed. Wait for me." And Raju instantly, God bless him, texts back saying, "I am at your disposal, princess," accompanied by a heart emoji. Prema takes the 2 hairpins and crouches by the locked dormitory door. Quickly, efficiently, she pushes 1 hairpin into the bottom of the lock and uses the second to jiggle the tumblers. Soon there's a click and the doorknob turns. She mutters a silent thanks to a deceased uncle, a locksmith who taught her this trick, before slipping through the open door. Tiptoeing down the dim, silent corridor, she passes the plump night nurse dozing at her desk. No one hears Prema's soft footsteps going down the back stair. No one hears nail scissors snipping through the alarm wires. The back door swings open and she emerges out into the backyard. The night air smells like nectar after 8 months of being locked inside the stuffy dormitory. Her armpits are already wet and slick. Her breathing is ragged, a bad sign, she knows, because she must now walk 3 kilometers, but she remains calm. Wiping sweat from her eyes, she surveys the backyard. Unlike the carefully composed front of the clinic, this area is a mess. The grass is waist-high, uncut, and littered with the rusting hulks of discarded incubators. Perhaps she could push one of those to the concrete boundary wall and use it to climb over. But there are glittering shards of glass embedded into the top of the wall, not an option. The only other exit, the main gate, will be chained shut this late at night. Don't panic, she thinks, use your head. She has been taken downstairs for tests, and she remembers seeing a small side gate. It might be unlocked. The clinic has been in operation for 8 years, and the doctors like to boast that no surrogate has ever tried to run away from here. She inches along the base of the building and peers around the corner. No, it can't be. The side gate has no padlock, but it is guarded by a leathery old security guard, the overhead light glinting off his bald head. He sits in a plastic chair, flipping slowly through a glossy Bollywood magazine. Prema rears back, and the baby girl in her womb thrashes like a fish. That's it for me. Thanks.
Nice. Well done.
Can't wait to see that on the shelves of the regulator. Excited. Brian, go ahead. Take us home, man.
Okay, quickly, what did you want me to read something that I'm working on, or did you want me to read something that you had given to your?
Totally up to you. Totally up to you. If you got something you're working on.
I just had this idea that maybe I would just bust this out, because when you and I talked earlier, I told you that I had this full download idea, and nobody's heard this yet. I haven't read it to anyone. So yeah, I'm gonna give this a shot. Is that cool?
Yeah, please.
Okay. Well, just a quick. When I wrote Like Lions, there was a bit character in that book. His name was Nails McKenna. He's mentally challenged, thug, leg breaker, and he was more of a plot device for me until he started talking, like I talked about earlier, and he became this character. But he's regulated to like 1-2 chapters in the book. But there was such a huge response. People connected with this character and I had left it open about what his background would be, until all of a sudden, boom, I had this this whole book just fell into my head. Anyway, so this is going back and talking about Nails. The name of the book is Nails, and this is 1989, excuse me. And it starts off with a quote from REM: "Buy the sky and sell the sky and bleed the sky and tell the sky, don't fall on me," the boy sang out loud, not realizing it. He did that sometimes, and he hated that about himself. But that was just one thing. See, there was a lot to hate. Nelson spent most of his morning walking the railroad tracks that cut through the northern tip of McFalls County. He'd never actually seen a train come through here, and the foot-tall skunkweed that grew up through the brittle wooden ties made him believe that the tracks were now a relic of the past. But at night, sometimes from his bedroom, he'd hear that whistle blow. Maybe it came from the closer to town, down around Waymore. But he never walked that far before. He bent over to pick up a glass Coke bottle and hurled it several feet down the tracks. It shattered into the railroad ties and echoed out into the morning, spooking a flock of nesting sparrows that took to the sky in an inky swirl. He kept walking a little while and stopped to toss crushed soda cans and chunks of rock against concrete embankment under Slater Street Bridge until the dying batteries in his Walkman began to make the music in his headphones warp. Eventually, as Michael Stipe's tenor began to slow and warp in his ears, the boy slid the wire headpiece down his neck and decided to make his way to the pond. After a short hike through the woods, careful not to disturb any of the pristine early morning spiderwebs that had been freshly spun the night before, the boy emerged from the tree line and crossed a grassy clearing until he reached the water's edge. He dropped his Walkman and his backpack onto the smooth chunk of limestone and sat down beside them. The breeze sweeping off the moss-coated water was cool that time of day, and it felt good as it blew around his shirt collar and crept down his chest. Wind held the added blessing of easing the dull ache in his head that ebbed underneath his blackened left eye. See, his father, Satchel, had popped him pretty good the night before at supper. And although the doughy pink welt that he'd left had cooled and morphed down to a patchwork of violet and yellow bruises, it still hurt like hell. Nelson rubbed at his face and thought about examining his wounded eye and the reflection in the water. But after long consideration, he opted to leave it. Nelson had never been fond of his face, even when he wasn't toting a black eye. So why did it matter now? Ugly's how you start out, and ugly's how you stayed, despite how much extra damage you got piled on. People told him all the time that his eyes were too close together. He reckoned that was true. In fact, all of Nelson's facial features pooled together in the middle of his face, making his forehead and cheeks always look swollen. His premature thinning hairline didn't help matters. Nothing helped matters. He felt a sudden urge to break the mirrored surface of the pond by jumping straight into it. He did that sometimes when he was out here alone, just to try to wash the salt out of his wounds. But in the end, he decided against that too. Instead, he reached over, unzipped his backpack, and began to rummage through it, looking for that cat head he'd smeared with blackberry jam and wrapped in a paper towel before he left the house. When he found it, he fished a hefty biscuit out of the bag and held it to his nose. That fresh churned butter and mashed berries made his mouth water. He unwrapped the paper and took a bite. It started to dry. Excuse me. It started off dry and soaked up all the saliva in his mouth until it smoothed into sweet cream. He closed his eyes and chewed slowly in order to make it last, because he knew that was most likely all he was going to eat today. Satchel wasn't going to let up anytime soon, and the boy honestly had nowhere else to go. He swallowed hard, sat the biscuit on the rock beside him, and then reached back into the pack and slid out that shiny, flat comic book. Batman, number 428. The bright colors on the glossy cover gleamed in the sunlight, and Nelson handled it in his open palm as if it was his mama's fine china. The boy loved comic books. Most people dismissed them as drugstore garbage, just picture books for little kids. But for Nelson, they were a whole lot more than that. Comics helped him learn to read. Guys are going to see me in this. Way better than any high school teacher had ever done. The way the words came in short bursts along with pictures helped him understand instead of all the rows of letters that were lined up in black and white jumbles across the page. They allowed him to enjoy the story more. He tried to explain that to his teachers at school several times, but they never understood, or they didn't want to, but he didn't care. He loved those comics regardless. They'd become his prized possessions as a kid. Of course, that was also before they basically became tangible apologies for the beatings he got from his father. After the old man would put a whooping on the boy for whatever reason, and then would fall off drunk somewhere, the next morning, Nelson's mother would lay a fresh comic book on the foot of the bed while he slept, or she'd slide one into his backpack as some sort of, sorry, I didn't stop him again. You see, love came served up folded down the middle of the McKenna house, like a stash of $1 bills cupped into a handshake, like a fucking bribe. It was a 1-2 punch, daddy's fist and mama's guilt. When Nelson was little, he used to cry when he thought on his father's anger or his mother's silence. But as he got older, he began to understand and stop blaming them for how they felt about it. Satchel and Ruth McKenna had been dealt a bad shake. That's what happened on the mountain when you rolled God's dice. Nelson wasn't as stupid as everyone thought he was. He got it. He knew his parents were only human. He knew that they had both felt joy when they found out they were having their first child. He'd seen their faces in the boxes of Polaroids and on the picture albums that his mom had tucked away in the hall closet. Those photos told a story of a simple, hardworking couple from God's country in love. Good folks playing by the rules, doing their best, starting a family. Nelson saw the pride on his father's younger face in those pictures, the pride that came from knowing he was having a son. A son. And having sons up here in the clouds, under these foothills, meant everything to fathers. It means having a stronger, better version of themselves to carry out their family name. For Satchel, it meant carrying on the McKenna name, because that was the Lord's way. But clearly, that's not what the Lord up here wanted. Nope, this exalted huckster wanted them to have a freak. The common belief among most of the folks residing in the Blue Ridge foothills is that God never gives us more weight than they can carry. But by the time Nelson McKenna was 17 years old, he'd abandoned that ration of nonsense and took to his own belief. But sometimes God just wants to have a fucking laugh. I'll stop there.
Well, thank you guys. Yeah, I'm glad I don't have to read after either of y'all. So I'm glad to be moderating. Well, thank you. Well, let's open it up to the folks in the audience. And if you're watching on Facebook Live, just go ahead and put it in the comments section, and we'll keep an eye on it. And if you've got a question, you could type it into the chat or raise your hand. Go ahead, Ariel.
Hey, I'm Ariel. I'm in the Knives Out class. I thought it was very interesting to hear both of you guys speak because I really love writing, but I also don't see myself as somebody who is going to realistically go directly into a career where I'm just writing. I think it's something that I'm going to want to do for the rest of my life just because it makes me happy. But I think that I still have a long way to go in terms of like writing experience and in terms of lived experience before I really think I'm capable of telling the kinds of stories I want to tell. So as people who were able to sort of like take those years between like being like the sort of young adult I am right now and whenever you sort of took your major steps into becoming writers, what sort of, I don't know if advice is too general, but what sort of experiences do you think helped you sort of become ready to like make and share work like you are now?
I mean,
What?
I got to answer for you right real quick. First of all, don't do that to yourself. Don't put that on you from the beginning. Don't say that you need to acquire life experience before you can write at a level that you think is good enough. Just write, man. Just write. You have, how old are you? Yeah, that was a rude question. I'm asking a woman how old she is.
I'm 21.
Okay, well, that's 21 years of life experience right now that you have that you can put into any kind of story you want to. So don't listen to me who spent 15 years out on the road with a band and I needed that to make myself a better writer. Listen to you say, I got a story to tell, and then just tell it, because nobody's going to be able to tell your story better than you. So just take those initial stumbling blocks, just chuck them out the window. You don't need any experience at anything to write. You just need to write. And sure, maybe it won't be that great when you start out, and you'll know it. And your best friends will probably let you know it as well, you know, the people that you work with. But man, if you're not doing it on the regular, then it's like anything else. It just atrophies and you get scared and worried and doubtful, and damn that. Just do it now. Your turn, bro.
Wow, that's a great answer. Yeah, I mean, I think that as Duke students, you guys are Duke students, so you're ambitious, you're smart, you want to get good grades, and you also want to be able to pay the bills when you get out of college, right? And it's no longer cute being an undergrad, but suddenly you're just an unemployed schmuck. So I understand your fears. I think the people who end up being writers and spending years alone in a room in their pajamas, which is not very glamorous, just do it because they have to. It's a compulsion. Like, we have to write. On the days when I don't write, I'm cranky. I feel like my day's been wasted. I'm a much nicer person, a better husband, a better dad on the days when I've written. I don't have to write brilliantly, but it's a way I think that we're so messed up that we need the writing to help integrate our personalities, right? Like, writers have very thin skins, so they absorb everything. They absorb atmospheres, they absorb characters, right? Like we go through this world and we're like extra sensitive, you know, we're picking up on all kinds of stuff. So I think for a lot of writers I know, and writers are the most, I mean, creative people in general, but writers are really messed up. Like, really, like all my friends. Like, if I had to only be friends with sane people, I would have no friends, right? No writer friends. So we kind of do this because we have to. We really need to do it. So if you don't need to do it, then good luck. Like, have a great life as a doctor or the CEO of a biotech company or whatever. There are many different ways of living, right? Having said that, I will say there is something special about like writing and studying writing and actually having written something, because it's damn hard. It's really hard. And you have to confront, when you're writing, it's not just learning how to write, like, oh, I can write character. It's like confronting yourself. All your fears will all come out. All the voices in your head that tell you that you can't do it will come out. So it requires courage. So if nothing else, like writing requires some courage. And also, it's not what you have experienced. You don't have to go out and like do something extraordinary to become a writer. Like after Hemingway, people thought they had to go to like Spain and like, you know, fight bulls in order to become writers, right? You don't have to. It's just having a certain way of looking at the world, right? And the way that you might even describe this little soiree that we're having here it would be so different than what other people here would describe it. And if you have a certain way of looking at the world that's interesting, then people will be interested in your writing, right? In terms of turning it into a full-time career, that's insane. It's insane. Like if you know, most of the writers I know are broke, or we're teaching in universities, are giving us some shelter in universities, you know. Very few people like Brian are like actually like selling books. Like it takes 3 books in print and many thousands of copies in order to make a living, right? But that doesn't but so I think it's both a mix of writing keeps us sane, but it's an insane thing to do.
Somebody else has a question that's just burning to be asked, please jump in. But I had a question sort of that it's related to Ariel's question, and it's for me, like as a writer, you know, a writing community is a big part of the gig. I mean, it helps to know somebody else is with you in the trenches. And I mean, the other thing is that, you know, writers in terms of friendships, they manage to kind of self-select, you know. I mean, Brian, the first time we got on the phone, we talked for 2.5 hours, you know. I mean, and that's like, I just think that there's a kind of a bond, a kinship that is a big part of the joy. And I guess that I'm just curious, you know, what, as broad as this question is, but what has the community of writing, how has it changed during COVID? And I mean, feel free to answer this however you want. I mean, just in terms of how you promote, or even your practice, or how you relate to your readers, or.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack there. Like I'll start first with community, that like writers community, and it is a dual-edged sword that you have to be like kind of wary of, because a lot of it's predatory, but at the same time, like you'll make some of your best friends. When I read Wyoming, I immediately sat the book down and tried to figure out who the guy was that wrote it, because I knew after reading the book that I should be friends with that guy. Like whoever wrote this, whoever did this, is somebody that I need to have in my wheelhouse, because it just makes sense. And sure shit, you know, now you are. And it was a monumental deal for me. And now I have another person in my crew that I can count on and talk to, and who can read my shit, and I can read your shit, and it's awesome. Now, at the same time, flip into the back page of like Writer's Digest, where there's 13 MFA programs that are offered that are all garbage, and there's 15 residencies or at Lake Tahoe that you can go and spend $15,000 to, you know, and go and listen to chimes and write. Fuck that, man. I mean, it's all nonsense. Or, you know, there's a short story contest where you pay, you know, $100 to get in to, and then you lose, and all those $100, you know, go to somebody so that they can start another contest. I mean, it's crazy. So stay away from that shit. Don't ever pay anybody to do anything. Remember, all those people work for you. Everybody who has your career in mind or your best interest in mind are going to be people that are going to want you to make your career first, so that they can have some of it. They're going to want to put you here and be here. They all work for you. But the other side to that is communities, and it's like, as soon as I'm done with this phone call, I'm going to want to sit down and rework what I just read earlier, you know, because that I feel inspired now. I'm hanging out with writers, you know, and I mean, I just made a new friend. I've, you know, and talking to you guys, it's almost it's just a great feeling. It's like firemen hang out with firemen, plumbers hang out with plumbers, you know, cops hang out with cops. You know, writers hang out with writers. So you should do that. If it's what you enjoy, you get to talk about it without feeling silly. You know, you get to, you know, go back and forth, be inspired, that kind of thing. Don't ever take that for granted. Love it and do it, but also be wary that there are people in the community that just love to talk about writing, and they love to tell you how to do it, and they just love to be that guy. They're not actually producing any work, but they're sure as shit ready to tell you how you should. So as long as you're relatively good at juggling those two kinds of, you know, personalities, then I think that community can be your most powerful tool as far as inspiration to sit down and write. JP and I had a conversation, and I got off that phone, man, and I went and I read a book that he recommended, and man, a couple of months later, I got an idea and sat down and I said, I'm going to do it the way he said to do it, man, because he inspired me. And I sat down and started writing this book. And you know, and that probably would not have happened in the same circumstance, in the same way, had I not read this book and then said, fuck, I need to know that guy. I want to know that guy. So build your own community, be part of it. It's amazing.
Good. Thank you, Brian. I second that. There is this idea of the writer as like a lone genius sitting in a room, like writing alone. And there is a lot of alone time. That's where the books come from, sitting in your room, kind of in this trance state, writing, right? Like tapping into the unconscious, whatever it is. But look at the back of any acknowledgements for any writer, and you'll see how many people are being acknowledged, like 30, 40 people, right? Because this is a lonely business. It's a freaky business. And if you don't have a good community of writers around, like, it's very hard to make it, right? Because you need a camaraderie, you need a cohort of people around you who will read your stuff, will give you honest feedback, or when you lose confidence in your own work, when they will cheer you on and they will hold the torch for you when you're going through periods of darkness. So it's really, if you have found in your writing class a couple of writers that you click with, like you guys, you like this stuff, they like your stuff, they make sense to you, hold on to them, right? So I moved to Durham in the middle of the pandemic. I was in Cambridge before that, and I was living in Chicago before that. So my writing group was in Chicago, and my writing group still is in Chicago. It's these two women, and we've been sharing work for 4 or 5 years now. And because of one of those women, I got my literary agent through her, because she made an introduction to me for me. And I met a literary agent at a conference, and then that person a few years later became my agent. We have gone through 3 or 4 published books together, both fiction and nonfiction. Without those people, I wouldn't have made it. And we have deadlines every month, like, hey, I'm going to send you 50 pages. I'm going to send you 100 pages. Somehow it gets done. If I didn't have that deadline, my work would not get done. So just I think having a community of writers is super, super important. And you guys are lucky because you have, you know, these kind of classes and these kind of setups here that where you can meet cool people who are at your level. And I just finished teaching my intro to fiction course, and I thought I was going to be really happy, because who wants to keep grading stories every week, right? Like, you know, and have to chase students and be like, hey, your story's late, and like, oh, my grandmother died, like, come on, like, leave me alone, I just want to write my novel. But I finished my class, and I was depressed for the next 2 days. I literally felt depressed because we had created this cool community of people. 15 of us would get together in a room for 2.5 hours, and we would kind of joke with each other, and we kind of got, and because it's writing and you're reading somebody's innermost thoughts, you really get to know these people really, like, intimately, and what their hangups are, and, you know, what their buttons are. And we would, like, kind of joke amongst each other and also give each other really good feedback. And I was so sad to have made this community for, you know, 3 or 4 months, and now poof, it's gone. So when you have the community, hold on to it. It's very precious.
I would love to take one of your classes. I mean, you have the way you speak and you get passionate and you're like in there, man. I bet your classes are fucking fun, man.
I'm just happy not to be an architect. So that's where my passion comes from.
Well, amen to everything Amin said. I think from here on in, I'm going to send out a note of warning to all the grandmas in our classes, because they're in trouble, buddy. In semester, there's always 1 or 2. So I don't, it's, I guess it's just chance,
There's a story in that, man.
right?
There is absolutely a very,
Um,
very dark story in that.
But Henry, you had a question, and
Hi,
then
I'm Henry. I
unfortunately we
said
have to
something
wrap up
stupid.
because I'm gonna need to
What?
start conferences at 5 o'clock.
Okay. Oh yeah, sorry. I said something really stupid at the beginning, I think, about like thrillers or whatever. Hi again to both of you. Those were really cool
What's up, Henry?
pieces. And I was listening to you reading them, and then I was like, oh yeah, this is cool. I like the way that they're moving, and they're combining plot and character in the same pieces. Um, I kind of had another stupid question, which was just like what are you guys reading, or what are your favorite books, and like, are there any particular writers that you read that then you like you learn from, I guess, not model necessarily, but like learn, like pick pieces out of?
Those are good questions.
I'm a huge fan of Steinbeck, and I go back and I read Steinbeck, even though I could probably recite it to you. I read it all the time because I get something new from it. So to answer the teaching you something question, Steinbeck is a huge deal for me. Cormac McCarthy is another one. Sometimes I can read his novels and not know what the hell just happened. And then I'll have to go back and read it again. And maybe on the fourth shot, I'll say, oh my God, how did I miss that 4 times? So yeah. And as far as like writers right now that I enjoy reading, your teacher is one of them. That book was probably one of the best books I've read in the past 5 years. Christian Kiefer is another one. He wrote a book called Phantoms just recently, and it is grueling, breathtaking, gorgeous, awesome. One of those books, I threw it across the room because I'll never be that good. And lastly, I like to always recommend James Anderson. His debut novel was called The Never Open Desert Diner, and every author looks for the idea, like being able to write something completely original, because the song remains the same, man. I mean, we're all going to write something that's already been written, and that's just how it goes. But this guy wrote a book, and if the story exists before he wrote it, I'm not aware of it in all of my 50 years. Brilliant novel, man. Wow, mind-blowingly good. So yeah, those 3 guys I'd recommend. And then if you want to learn how to do it better than everybody, then pick up something that Steinbeck wrote. And I would recommend his short stories and novellas more so than I would his novels.
Cool. That's like a great reminder. I haven't read Steinbeck since high school. So yeah, things become tainted in high school, right? Like, oh, I had to read that. Shakespeare, like, nah.
Hemingway. That was what it was like for him. Like, I hated Hemingway because they forced it on me. Yeah. And now, like, as a senior citizen, I'm finally getting it and liking it, But for my life, I was like, I'm not reading that guy. Everybody wants me to read him. I'm not reading it.
Yeah.
Hemingway would have been totally canceled, Do you think?
Yes.
He was not a very nice person, man. I watched that documentary just recently. He was an awful,
perhaps for good reason.
Yeah, man. He would have straight up been canceled.
Yep.
Anyway, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut in on you, bro.
Oh, no, not at all. Hemingway used to like to wear a dress. So when he was younger, he'd walk around in a dress. So for whatever that's worth. Anyway,
that doesn't bother me so much. Don't beat women, though. You can wear a dress. In fact, I'm not even wearing pants right now. But man, you can do better, Ham. You can do better, Papa. Come on.
So in terms of there are some times when I'm just finishing up a multiple point of view novel. There are three points of view, including the protagonist. So I've been reading a bunch of multiple, before I started writing it, I started reading a lot of multiple points of view novels just to see how they worked. And one of the ones that I really liked as 2 points of view is Anthony Doerr's book, All the Light We Cannot See, which is about World War II. It's a fantastic book. Another one is Colin McCann's book about one day when a guy walks on a tightrope across the World Trade Center's buildings. This is in the 70s. And it's called Let the Great World Spin. Those are fantastic books. Right now, for some reason, my next novel, I think, is going to be like a kind of a retelling of Gatsby. The Great Gatsby, but with like immigrant characters. Because every time I read Gatsby, I think like, my God, he's an immigrant. You know, he's tried to remake himself. He's come to the East Coast. He's taken on this new identity, and it's a very familiar process for me. So I've just started rereading Gatsby, and like people who've taken Gatsby as an inspiration and written their own novels. There's a Joseph Neal book about New York City that's kind of a Gatsby-esque book. So I'm reading a lot of Fitzgerald, which he was an incredible craftsman, and he also went to Hollywood and he wrote for the movies, and he died I think he died in Hollywood, like broke, alcoholic. So he's an incredibly cinematic writer, who's I think was like way ahead of his time. So that's kind of what I'm reading. If you guys are interested in a memoir that combines both food and a mother dying horribly of cancer, which seems like an odd thing, there's a great memoir called Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner, who's the lead guitarist singer for a group called Japanese Breakfast. But she's written this incredible book, you know. And the idea that because she's half Korean and her mom would cook Korean food. So these incredible descriptions of eating Korean food and going to H Mart, which is this giant Asian supermarket, to buy groceries. And that, along with her mother, her complex relationship with her mother and her mother dying. The memoir is really, really hard to write because you can't completely make up shit, but it has to have the fluidity of fiction and has to have a pretty good structure. So I always learn a lot from like reading memoirs. So I think now nonfiction and memoir is so good that you can learn a lot. And in terms of like, yeah, do we read to steal shit? Of course.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Everything I read, I'm like, oh, yep. Well, how is this working? I mean, there's, first of all, you read something and you're like, oh, this is fantastic. Like, you know, you just enjoy it as a reader. And then you put you on your writer hat and say, oh, well, how did it work? What are the mechanics here? Because they're always mechanics, right? And then you go back and then you read it. The short story collection, Olive Kittredge by Elizabeth Stroud. I found the voice in those stories incredible. And it's about this kind of unlikable older woman who reminds me a lot of my mom. So it was also like an insights into my mom, how my mom works. But I went back and I kind of like really took those stories apart to see how they work. And I think as a writer, that's important, to get beyond the oh wow level and to get into the mechanics of it.
Well, let's put a reading list. I got a couple names scribbled down, so I know what I'm doing over winter break. Well, we've got about 3 minutes left, and then I gotta start some one-on-one conferences. I'll see some of y'all tonight, and I'll see some of y'all tomorrow, and I'll see some of y'all Friday. Any last burning questions that anybody has for our authors?
Don't ask us how much money we make. Do not do that.
Yeah,
don't do that.
You do not want to know. Well, yeah. Anyway,
don't try to do this for money. Absolutely not, man. I mean, there's only 1 or 2 or 3 household name authors, man, and even those guys don't get recognized in grocery stores. So don't do this for fame or money, please. Don't do it.
Well, luckily my students are geniuses. They're moving on to law school and programming,
do all that,
all kinds of glorious stuff.
I'm trying to get my daughter to go to Duke, man.
What's that?
I said I'm trying to get my daughter to apply.
That's right. That's right. We'll try to put on Amin and you and I got to put in a good word. But anyway, it's great to see you guys, and I'm gonna miss the hell out of this class. It's such a fun group, and you're so talented, and just don't lose your passion, because it's doing.
Hey, let me put this out there to all your students, man. If anybody has any questions or wants to talk about the business or anything like that, man, any process questions, I love talking, man. So if you want to pass out my email address, JP, if anybody asks, please, man, reach out, tell your students they can totally reach out. They can ask me anything, and I'd be happy to give advice. When it comes to reading your stuff, you know, that I would love to do that page or 2 at a time. You have to give me time with something like that, but I'd be happy to talk about any of this stuff with you guys at length, moving forward. That's always open. Always. Don't feel like you can't give them my contact information, man.
Nice.
All right. Well, that's very gracious, man. So I'll talk to you. Speaking of talking, I'll talk to you tomorrow. And
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah.
Let's grab coffee this week and or next if things work out. And the rest of you guys, I'll look forward to seeing you around campus. But have a great break. Quante, thanks again, man. It's not possible without you. All right, so long, everybody. Okay, take care.